Right. Excellencies and colleagues, it is an absolute honor to facilitate this panel. For us as a chair and center for social justice at Stellenbosch University, this takes us back to where we started 7 years ago. 7 years ago, the people who attended the round table on social justice at Stellenbosch were civil society members, business people, academics, and politicians. That's why when you look at the Musa Plan video, you see the late Ben Turok, you see the late F.W. de Klerk. We also had Madam Helen Zille, and I don't know how the camera did not capture her, but it is heartwarming for us when you, who have been chosen by the people of South Africa to manage our collective affairs, show interest in the most crucial that affects a lot of fellow South Africans. In your absence, honorable members and members of civil society, as panelists, people have indicated that globally, close to 1 billion people are hungry. And I choose not to use food secure, insecure, because the average person does not know what does food insecure mean. And I think calling it a spade, as the UN has done, just makes sense. So people are hungry, and Justice Potrel says in being hungry, they're being denied the justice of eating. She also said today, in being hungry, they're being denied freedom. And that's a member of the judiciary who says no one can be free if they're hungry. And former President Nelson Mandela said the same thing. Throughout his life, he was hungry, but it started with hunger for real food, then hunger for food, hunger for freedom. The Constitutional Court has said in the government of the Republic of South Africa versus Grootboom, I quote, "The people of South Africa are committed to the attainment of social justice and the improvement of the quality of life for everyone." The preamble to our Constitution records this commitment. The Constitution declares the founding values of our society to be human dignity, the achievement of equality, and the advancement of all human rights and freedoms. We have, as the Center for Social Justice, together with the Council of Social Justice Champions and partners that include the United Nations, the Department of Planning, Monitoring and Evaluation, the Human Rights Commission, and various other agencies, including the Food and Agriculture Organization, decided that our conversation today is focusing on 2 dimensions of hunger. Zero hunger is a sustainable development goal, the right to food as a human rights issue and a social justice issue. Those who have spoken to you have said it's not just a question of the availability of food, it's a systems problem. And they've indicated that it's about the availability of food, the accessibility of food, the utilization of food, and the sustainability of food. They've also declared that the average person who is not hungry because the food is not available. They're hungry because they can't afford food. And if they are having their stomach full, they still are nutritionally hungry. Now, You have been asked, distinguished panelists, to prepare your statements. Can you, as you read your statements, also please just indicate whether you do accept that our Constitution commits us as a country to achieve social justice, as Grootboom says. And as the preamble that we read this morning says, do you accept that? And do you accept that hunger is a social injustice and a human rights violation? B, do you believe that we all have responsibilities to end the social injustice of hunger? All of us, not just government, but of course, all of us having different responsibilities depending on our different spaces in life. Lastly, are you committed to do something to ensure that social justice is experienced by all, but focusing in the next year at least on the social justice of eating, if I may borrow from Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet whose words have been iconized by Justice or by Judge Portro. So that's my ABC, in addition to whatever else you are going to say. Accept, believe, commit. There's an order there here that has been prepared, so let's just follow that order, distinguished guests, while somebody helps me to put back what I have just unfortunately disturbed. Honorable Cameron Dartmouth, you have 5 minutes, and please do try and stick to the 5 minutes, simply because our panel is very huge, which is important because you all are crucial, but the time is limited. So over to you, sir. You can come here. Oh, would you prefer to stay there, or would you want to prefer to come here? If you prefer to come here, I can then sit there and then just call you as you come up. In your hands, yes, okay. I don't mind sitting here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. I'm sure you're aware that you just have to stop us after 5 minutes. Otherwise, we might go on. But thank you very much for this opportunity to really try and look at the interconnected nature of the right to food. I wanted to be here this morning. Unfortunately, something called me away. And I know I've missed out on a number of things, but I will be here until the rest of the afternoon. I think when we're talking about the interconnected nature of this, of the campaign for zero hunger, the right to food, from an ANC perspective, I believe that our 6 manifesto priorities begin to talk about the interconnected nature of dealing with the right to food. The first one being putting South Africa to work, the issue of jobs, and in growing an inclusive economy with this particular focus on building industry, tackling the high cost of living, both by reducing the cost of living and building the social wage, investing in people, defending our democracy, and also building a better Africa and a world. And those are in themselves, those manifesto commitments are interconnected and I believe are part of what we need to do. The National Development Plan 2030 talks about an approach to change, saying that there are 3 critical elements. The first one being the issue of active citizens, the second one being building capabilities generally, and the third one being about leadership, whether it's leadership of the country, leadership of a project, a union, a church, or a religious organization. And I think those 3 things are critical for this discussion. I think most of you here would be aware that after the elections, the President initiated the formation of a government of national unity. And the 3 key priorities, which I also believe impact on the interconnected nature are basically growing the economy inclusively and creating work. Secondly, reducing the cost of living, fighting poverty, and thirdly, building a capable state. And it's actually critical that we bear that in mind. Now, when we look at the cost of living, one of the key interventions has been the VAT exemptions on essential items. Land reform is critical in this debate, and concrete support for home gardens, food gardens. We've got many examples. Abalimi Basikaya, one here in the Western Cape, who has led the way there, and dealing with the conduct of cartels in the agricultural sector, and obviously the role of the Competition Commission. Those are key interventions that the ANC through the government has brought about. Act against price fixing. More can be done, but clearly that's critical. And then using the provisions in our constitution, and particularly the expropriation legislation that's gone through Parliament. It's now with the President, and we believe that giving access to security of tenure will help to improve food security and agricultural production. So that's a legislative intervention which is in line with our constitution about expropriation of land, and then obviously to progressively implement the basic income grant. That is a clear commitment and part of that social net. Now, the context of food poverty, issues of climate change, child stunting. We've got one of the worst problems in the world in terms of child stunting. The percentage of persons that have experienced hunger in our country has decreased from 29.3% in 2002 to 11.1% in 2019, and then before gradually increasing to 15% in 2023. It's interesting to look also at the issue of the household income structure across provinces, which provinces get more from salary, grants, income from a business, remittances, and pensions, because all of those issues that contribute to the household income clearly have an access on the right to food and dealing with the issue of hunger. A very interesting stat, Prof, which I think needs a lot more work, is when one looks at household productivity level in terms of the distribution of households who are actually involved in agriculture. I don't know how many people know, but the Western Cape is the lowest in the whole of South Africa. Only 2.3% of families in the Western Cape are actually producing food, compared to all other provinces are doing much, much better. What does that tell us about land ownership in this province? Is that flag indicating? Okay, well, I'm going to be disciplined, and if I have a chance to reply, we'll complete the sentence. Okay, if it's a long sentence. Because I haven't talked about the school nutrition program, NSFAS, the issue of the minimum wage, strengthening our comprehensive social security system, and the issue of energy. And the moral and legal accountability is driven, as you've said, Prof, by the Constitution. The rights that are actually enshrined there inform all of this. But the integrated approach, I would say, with capability, leadership, and active citizens is really what we need to integrate in terms of reaching zero hunger. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Prof. So I'm Dirk Wessels, representing the DA, and I'll be talking today about how we as a party are dealing with the right to food pertaining to the Democratic Alliance policies. So the DA has been very clear on its stance and its commitment to boosting food security through partnerships with communities, businesses, and all relevant stakeholders. We, as per previous discussion today, do also believe that the right to food is linked to a range of broader issues. It is linked to economic empowerment, sustainable agriculture, and the effectiveness of an accountable and an effective and responsible government. Effective governance and parties keeping their representatives to account is at the heart of funding these strategies, as cutting fuel taxes and levies to lower the cost of transport and reviewing the zero rate on the VAT food basket items. That can only be done when parties keeps representatives to account. The DA, through its fit-for-purpose approach, has by far the best local government results of all political parties here. And that can be found in any state, but is mainly underwritten by the Auditor General. This speaks not only to the policies, but the implementation ability of these policies, delivering to the communities. We see this very clearly where the DA governs. Earlier this year, Dr. Ivan Meyer officially opened the 9th World Congress on Conservation Agriculture. We do this because we understand that agriculture is in crisis. 54% of maize farmers that delivered to silos have gone out of business. Over the years of decline, we also saw extreme closing of businesses in the rural areas because of this. So it comes as no surprise that with a proactive approach by the Western Cape government, the DA-led Western Cape government, we saw a 51% adoption rate into the conservation agriculture program. We need to ask ourselves, how do we get new entrants access to land? Because we saw over the last 30 years that the exercise that was the status quo clearly doesn't work. So that's why the DA argues for a market-oriented approach that will enable economic growth, it will support farmers, and ultimately enhance the food product and accessibility. We as a party does not only talk our policies, but from what you've heard now, you can see that this is rather a policy at work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was Honorable Derek Wessels, replacing the Honorable Noko Masipa from the DA. And the first speaker was the Honorable Cameron Dagmo, representing the African National Congress. I'm going to ask, dear colleagues, that I will not introduce their profiles. Please look at page 22 of the program. If we do so, then the next speaker is another member of parliament representing the Good Party. He is the Secretary General of the Good Party, the Honorable Brett Heron, coming for the second time because he was part of our symposium on the same issue of hunger. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Prof, and good afternoon, everyone. It was a great privilege to be at that summit about a month ago. People are hungry, and anecdotally, just 2 years ago, I was in Nyanga KTC section, about 15 kilometers from here, where I met a young man who lives in a shack that has barely got anything in it. And when I asked him how he survives, he says he slaughters cats and then cooks them. Last year we heard of the mother in the Eastern Cape who killed her 3 children and committed suicide because they were hungry. And in the KwaZulu-Natal, we heard of children eating sand to fill their bellies. So yes, Prof, the bellies may be full, but that's not food. And you asked a really important question: do we regard the Constitution as a social justice mandate? And I think it's time that South Africans see the Constitution as our democracy's manifesto, placing a positive obligation on the state to meet those obligations that are in the Constitution, and the Constitution being less regarded as a defender of our rights to be used by civil society to protect rights when they are under threat. So we need to see that document not just as a document that defends rights, but as something that obliges the state to take positive steps to do something. And in the right to food space, there are things that the state has to do in order to achieve the right to food in a meaningful way. The right to food and the fact that people are hungry is a legacy of our history. It's a legacy of centuries of injustice, and we can't separate the right to food and the lack of access to meaningful access to food, without talking about the land issue, the original sin that South Africa still lives with today that has not been addressed. The land dispossession, the forced removals under the Group Areas Act, the establishment of an apartheid logic in our built environment and in our spatial form. And how that impacts the right to food is that South Africa doesn't have a shortage of food. We have a problem of accessibility and affordability. And where people live and where they work is determined spatially by their race in towns and cities. And poor, mostly black South Africans are on the outskirts of our city where retailers are not investing because those are pockets or suburbs of poverty. And so the underdevelopment in the spatial form of our towns and cities has direct bearing on the access to food, because studies have been done. There's a study that I referred to at our summit, Prof, by Patterson and Battersby, where in affluent areas, residents have 8 times as many choices of access to supermarkets as in poorer communities. Plaas from University of Western Cape did a similar study in Johannesburg and looked for food deserts in places like Orange Farm. And they found there weren't food deserts because informal retailers were taking up the space where the major retailers were absent, because major retailers are not investing in pockets of poverty. So the task of the state is to address the underinvestment and the disparity of investment between affluent areas in towns and cities and in rural areas, and areas that are historically created under the apartheid government and have never been invested in to bring them to remove the disparities. Part of the challenge is also to address the segregation that persists, so that we can start integrating poorer communities into areas that have got amenities and services and retailers and providing closer access spatially to food. The affordability challenge for South Africa and the right to food must be addressed through our Section 27 rights, including the right to social security. And we can no longer continue to talk about or do any more feasibility studies around the ability of South Africa to provide basic income to the 14 or 15 million adults who have not found employment because our economy is not generating enough jobs and our education system is not developing the right skills. But the question of affordability is tied directly to the lack of income. And so I'll close off my 5 minutes by saying, in a very complex space, I've tried to simplify the answer as we see it to 2 things. We need to address the spatial dimension of the access to food, which is tied to our historical spatial legacy, and we need to address the affordability of access to food, and we do that by making sure that we provide basic income support to South African adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Brent Herron. Honorable Musimaimane, you have the floor, sir.
Prof, thank you so much for inviting me. It's great always to see you, and thank you so much. Today I won't spend my time in protocol. I'd rather be quick in this particular question. You ask us 3 basic questions, whether we accept that this is a problem, and I think no one can deny that. You'd be mad to think you live in a South Africa where citizens are not hungry, and I think I don't want to be overly repetitive about the nature of the problem. Suffice to say that I asked the Statistician General what in fact is the cost for each citizen to survive per day. And the figure I was given is 60 Rand per day. Now, when you place it in that context, you have to ask the question, how many people can afford 60 Rand per day? And you discover quite quickly that 18 million South Africans are living on 35 Rand per day. So when we look at the problem of poverty, I think we need to know who we speak about. The second category that is most impacted by poverty is clearly women, and more specifically black women, because they found themselves at the forefront of poverty and ultimately get left behind from a function of not only looking after families who are hungry, but being the primary carers in a context that is hungry. So if you want to be food secure relatively, or at least to move towards the middle band of poverty, it would be a question of saying to yourself, how much money do you earn, which is at about 796 rands, is what we're looking for. So if you then appreciate the problem from that perspective, let me make a few interventions that I think are important. The first is, it is undeniable that food security is a basic human right. South Africans were treaties to multinationals, and if we're going to agree on SDGs, we are then bound by those, and therefore they need to find expressions in our law. But why that's important is because if it is not an expression of our constitution, we must concede that the government is failing South Africans as far as the provision of food. Therefore, it is failing its own constitution. The second is that actually we must consider what we do with municipalities. Municipalities, in the main, just over 60% of municipalities now are starting to default on their payments as far as Eskom is concerned. So that's one indicator that tells you that many municipalities are beginning to falter in their financial planning. Why I pick on municipalities is because generally most of them hold the indigent registers that help us identify who is poor, particularly in metropolitan areas. So we need to fix the leadership component on that issue. The third is that I think we need leadership on this issue. In all reality, we're poor at being able to allocate ministries and leaders in this space who are able to speak and focus on the issue of poverty. And here's the problem. Government has an incapability of being able to process data around poverty, around whether people are multidimensionally poor, and be able to implement that into policy. So if you take the NDP as a simple example, it does not find its expression on any annual performance plans, and therefore there's no adequate budgeting on that issue. So we need to be able to use data. If we're going to talk about data-driven analysis to poverty, let's figure out the best ways to put it into programming of government. Furthermore, I want to say policy interventions, and I'm going to be quick. The first is clearly there's a genuine question of education. If we're not educating our young people, they'll get stuck in a trap of poverty. Secondly, the land question has been put. I want to propose that in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, we need to be able to figure out how do we not only increase the child grant to at least align it to the food security grant, but I want to propose that we need to consider hard as a country about what is a maternal grant. Simply because a hungry woman who is pregnant is running the risk of giving birth to a child who is stunted, meaning that that child cannot reach their economic potential. We need to think about taxation on food, and I think my colleagues have mentioned that significantly, but I do want to say this is where corporates in this country needs to come into play. It should be immoral when we see high levels of inflation, and I understand the economics of the issue on certain basic food items that must go to citizens. I think we need to focus strongly on ECD centers because that's where young people, especially in their first 1,000 days, spend much of their time. If we don't address this issue, fellow South Africans, in a data-driven way, given the appropriate leadership, intervening in education and social policy, we have absolutely no right to have a peaceful society. And there shall be no peace when citizens are hungry. Full stop.
Thank you, Honorable Maimane, speaking for Busa Party. Can we have from the CEO of Peninsula School Feeding Association, Ms. Petrina Pako? Over to you, ma'am.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I have to start off by saying that I feel like a small fish in a very big ocean, especially when I have this esteemed panel that I'm sitting with. But I'm truly honored to have been invited to be here today. To introduce my organization, Peninsula School Feeding Association is a non-profit organization that operates within the Western Cape and that has existed for 66 years. We have served over 2 billion meals. It's an organization that came about because of social injustice decisions by the government at the time to stop feeding in schools. It was meant to be a stopgap organization started by the Rotary Club and faith organizations. But here we are, 66 years later, still addressing the concern of childhood hunger in schools. Presently, we feed within the Western Cape 27,601 learners in primary and secondary school 2 nutritious meals. We also feed 8,150 learners in early childhood development centers across both the Western Cape and the Eastern Cape. And we feed 3,180 learners in colleges. We do this at an average cost of R3.53 per learner for both meals. So if you can find that any cheaper, please give me a call. The World Food theme for this year is the right to food for a better life and a better future. And this could not be more suitable to describe what our organization does, as our motto says, you cannot teach a hungry child. We have heard the statistics of what the challenges are that our country is facing relating to sustainable development goals, especially regarding zero hunger. I do, however, want to highlight the issue of acute malnutrition, which is on the increase, especially in our rural communities. As indicated by our keynote speakers, we want access to food for all, but we need to talk about the quality of the food and the nutritional value of the food. Feeding for the sake of filling a tummy for the short term only results in long-term health problems, as was indicated also earlier today. We need to access nutritional value. We need to access the nutritional value of the meal. We also need to look at the dignity of how the meal is presented to our most needy. While government does have food security programs in various departments like the National School Nutrition Program, the Food Parcel Program of the Department of Social Development, what is lacking for me is a more concerted effort to form strategic partnerships with nonprofits who have the capacity to address food insecurity at scale, and we need government to provide those NPOs with the necessary funding and infrastructure support, because no one sector can do it on its own. And we've had that being repeated several times this morning also. We saw the video of the Musi Plan. It speaks about the importance of collaboration. The thing that is lacking, in my opinion, is the willpower to work together. To provide an example of how Peninsula School Feeding has been able to work together with other NPOs is that we work with local farmers in the Philippi area where we are situated. We do bulk procurement of food. We have a partner here today, SA Harvest, who is in the room. We work with organizations like Food Forward and others. By pooling resources, we are able to achieve so much more. We look at the importance of micronutrients in the meals that are being fed, especially to our young children. We need to procure at mass for the food to feed our learners, and where possible, support other smaller nonprofits so they can benefit from the discounts that we receive. We work with community kitchens by donating food to them also. With the announcement of COVID, we were one of the organizations that fed throughout. When the announcement was made, we immediately started working with the community kitchens, providing them food, and then with the hard lockdown, delivering food parcels directly to the doors of the children. In ending, I want to say that there has to be a willpower to work together. Summits, seminars, research documents are important, but unless we put the recommendations and the resolutions into action and keep each other accountable, organizations like PSFA will need to continue for another 66 years or more. Thank you.
Thank you. That was Petrina Parker. You're not a small fish in a deep pond, ma'am. You are an equal player, and that's the social justice understanding. The next speaker is Mr. Sandile Shabalala, co-founder Huruma Banfu. Is Mr. Sandile Shabalala around? Or online? Okay, he's not been scratched out. Okay. The next one is Miss Nokwanele Mbeu, Operations and Partners Manager at Grow Great. Over to you, ma'am. You have your 5 minutes.
I'm glad Mr. Sandile is not here. I'm going to have my 10 minutes. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Nokwanele Mbeu, coming from Grow Great campaign. We are a campaign that has a bold goal to have stunting by 2030. I think when I'm standing here, I feel that we have partners now to reach that goal. You ask us, Prof, if we believe, agree, and commit. How do we not believe if we know? So we know that stunting is the most common form of malnutrition in South Africa, affecting over 1.5 million children under 5 years. That is 27%. This has remained persistent over 3 decades. Malnutrition also presents itself in the form of obesity, affecting 13% of children under 5 in this country, which is 730,000 children. Severe acute malnutrition cases has recently increased from a ratio of 2 children per 1,000 to a ratio of 2.4 children per 1,000. Why? Studies show that 20% of children under 6 live in households that ran out of food before the end of the month because there was not enough money. And also 26% of children live in households where they were forced to reduce food range due to lack of food. And this is a concern for us because we know that for a better nutrition, you have to have better food diversity. Food inflation is not in favor of these families that I've just mentioned. It would be futile to educate pregnant mothers, parents on healthy choices without advocating for healthy food to be affordable. So what do we do as an organization? We have 2 flagship programs. So I'm not sure if the room is aware that South Africa has more than 70,000 community health workers. This cadre is a cadre that has access into homes. They have access to the most vulnerable children that are coming from families with lack of health-seeking behaviors because of how vulnerable they are. So our role is to educate the community health workers, resource them so that they can be able to identify stunting at an early age and be able to intervene within the first 1,000 days. The second flagship program that we run is a Flourish program. So we've understood that in our unequal society, there are people who can afford prenatal and postnatal classes when they are pregnant. And then we've made that affordable for everyone. So we have Flourish hosts that are having 20 classes prenatally and postnatally to support mothers to raise children healthier. We are advocating for maternal grant. I'm glad, Mr. Maimane, you mentioned that. We are also advocating for foods that we call 10 best buys, where we want government together with food producers to discuss and sit on the table, rebate and decrease the prices of this food by 30%. We have commissioned our own stunting studies in 7 provinces, and we've seen where the high-risk children are. And we aim to train 50% of the community health workers in the country and make sure that we resource them. In closing, I saw that I had 2 minutes, even though I have 10 minutes. In closing, South Africa, a country or government or politicians that do not care of their most vulnerable population, which is children and mothers in this case, is playing with fire. The consequences are quite pricey, and they will affect our education system, as they already are, health system, as well as our economy. I thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Kwanele Mbewu, can we have Dr. Ingrid Leroux, Director Pilani Maternal Child and Nutrition Trust, which is a lovely segueing from what we've just heard from Grow Great by Ms. Kwanele Mbewu. You go, Doc.
Thank you, Professor Manusela, for this opportunity. And I think you will soon realize that Nokwanele and I have worked as partners for 20 years. If one asks what Africa's biggest health challenge is, one might expect the answer to be TB, HIV, or maybe malaria. But those well-informed agree that it is malnutrition and the slow destruction of human potential that is our biggest challenge. The organization that I represent on this panel today, Pilani Maternal Child Health and Nutrition Trust, has worked for 40 years in Crossroads, Khayelitsha, and OR Tambo district in Eastern Cape, identifying, supporting, and rehabilitating low birth weight, malnourished, and stunted children, and working to prevent malnutrition by facilitating access to resources through income generation, the government safety net, and support women throughout their pregnancy and beyond. It does not need to be said again that malnutrition, wasting, and stunting is the end result of hunger. More than a quarter of our children are suffering from chronic malnutrition. That has been said many times today. And a slow but consistent insult on a child's inherited potential. The government's social policies, school feeding, child support grant, pensions and disability grants, etc., makes up an important social safety net. But with the persistent high chronic child malnutrition, we can see it is not enough. The lack of resources to access affordable quality food are huge obstacles to eliminate child malnutrition. We have, like Nokwanele just mentioned, an army of community health workers in South Africa, and some of them are working for Pilani. We call them mentor mothers. 2 simple interventions by mentor mothers have halved the malnutrition rates in our target communities. 1, our mentor mothers carry scales and measure tapes. Through community growth monitoring, they identify and rehabilitate children at nutrition risk. 2, a baby who is born with a low birth weight gets special care and support by our mentor mothers in order for these children to be fully rehabilitated to normal weight and height by 1 year. They enter the world small and short, and we are not allowing them to continue being malnourished. Mothers are cared for and looked after during pregnancy to lower the risk of giving birth to a low birth weight child. These two simple interventions could be done by 70,000 community health workers all over South Africa, and acute and chronic malnutrition could be drastically reduced while we wait for more efficient, far-reaching policies to improve food security and advocate for a basic income grant. We accept, we believe, and we commit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ingrid Leroux. I particularly am grateful that you've responded also to the ABC. To those who didn't respond, I'll come back to you, because when we had the 2019 Social Justice Summit, how we got the Musa Plan agreed to was the starting point was that everyone in the room agreed that advancing social justice was a constitutional responsibility, and that we all have a responsibility, and then they were committed to move forward. So I might ask the question differently when I come back to you to say, is there somebody on the panel who doesn't believe that social justice is a constitutional responsibility that we all have to deal with, and that food is a social justice issue, or hunger is a social justice. So it's in that context, esteemed panelists, that I'm asking that question, because we want to move the needle to the next level from this summit. Okay, can we have the next person, Miss Francesca de Gasparis, Executive Director, Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Institute. I must say I'm particularly happy that we have somebody from the faith community, because if you remember 1932, or just before 1932, when white poverty was identified as an issue in this country, the people who were at the forefront of that was the faith community. The crafting of the Carnegie Report was by the faith community, and what happened after that was by the faith community, sadly leading to apartheid and the Group Areas Act of 1950. So when I've met the faith community, they've said they are engaging in repentance. But when I met Anton Rupert's daughter, she said repentance needs legs. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Prof, and good afternoon, everyone. I also want to appreciate being on this esteemed panel. Although I'm not speaking so much about our political leadership and more about the frontline organizations that are dealing with hunger directly. Thank you so much for your work. I'm really honored to be here. I do also esteem you, our political leaders. So I'm Francesca de Gasparis, and I'm the Executive Director of SAFC, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute, and we are a multi-faith environmental justice NGO. And so I want to come with a particular lens. I'm not going to talk so much about what the faith communities are doing, and it's many, both many things to repent for, many things not doing well, but also we know that our faith leaders, as we saw during COVID, are often part of that front line who are dealing and witnessing the hunger that's being experienced in communities around South Africa. And they really do take tremendous action. So I also want to pay tribute to all those people of faith running the soup kitchens, doing that very, very important work, that intervention work. But I'd like to take a step back from that and really go upstream, as they say, you know, not fishing the babies out of the river, but actually going up, who's putting the babies in the river. And I do think that that is about taking a step out of how we measure success, how we think about finance and convenience as the way that we're going to actually solve our problems. Because if we keep thinking with the same approach, we're going to find ourselves right back where we find ourselves, which is that there's not enough money for people to actually eat nutritious food. Because oftentimes, people are also eating food, but they're not getting sufficient nutrition. And that's a problem that's right across society. How we eat. When I was in the green room downstairs before, I was hunting around for a little snack, and in came a delectable array of delicious meat products. But I bet you none of us know where those meat products came from.